refreshment, so hopefully we get a chance to speak to him and shake his hand and thank him. We're very blessed to have Carol Spackman Moss here again with us this year. Out of all the veterans events that are going around in our state and in our city, she has committed to come and speak with us. And she brings a very interesting voice about Veterans Day and a very personal story to share. And I just love her to death, and she loves our country, and she loves our city, and she loves our state. Please welcome Carol Spackman Moss.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to these lovely young ladies who sang. You have beautiful voices, and I'm so glad that they're participating in a Veterans Day observance, because I think our children today and grandchildren don't know enough about the sacrifices that our veterans have given to our country. So I'm so glad that you participated. Thank you very much. And I always get emotional when I hear the music of our patriotic songs. And also when I was driving here today, so we left our driveway and started down the street, and the street was lined with flags, and it was really very touching. And so this is really a meaningful day for me, and one that I'm honored to be a participant in and to talk about. First of all, though, I'd like to have those of you who are veterans, I won't ask you all to stand, but just raise your hand so I can see how many veterans we have. Oh, raise your hand. Oh, I'm so glad to know that, and I'll kind of know that, you know, especially speaking to you, but all those others too, who've been a part of our country's growth and the losses that we've incurred to make our country free. And I'd like to, yes, David.
Just as a little education, I was in the uniform service, the U.S. Public Health Service. We didn't go to combat and we didn't bear arms, but we helped people stay well. So I think it kind of counts.
I think
Absolutely.
That counts. I think that counts. I want you to know that David Sundwall and I go way back, and is his wife here yet?
Not yet. She'll be here.
Catherine and I taught together at Olympus High for a few years. Many years ago, she was in the room next to me. We both taught English, and then she left and went to law school. And then we came together again when David moved back to Salt Lake and worked for the state. So I'm happy to see old friends and meet new ones today. And I'd just like to also mention my husband, Bob, who's here today, and he's a veteran of the Korean War, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. I'm especially glad to be asked, and Michael asked me last year, because so many times men are asked to speak at these events and not women. Maybe people think they didn't serve, but I definitely was a part of the war and the wars, as were all you women who had family members serve, because we played a very important role in the history of our country and its service. But today is the day to take some time to remember those sacrifices and to honor those who have served, and to the families who've sacrificed so much so we can live free. Excuse me that I have to use notes, but I have to do this just to keep on track. Sometimes I don't want to forget things. Like any good teacher, I always have much more material than I need, but that's what teachers do. You're always prepared. I just want to go back almost 100 years to November 11th, 1918. We're coming up on the 100th year anniversary. A group of men gathered in a train car in France to sign a document that brought World War I hostilities to an end. It was a war that killed more than 16 million people, including over 100,000 Americans. Congress, as you know, officially named the date Armistice Day in 1926 and made it a national holiday in 1938. But a holiday commemorating the war to end all wars was a little premature, wasn't it? A year later, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, ending the peace, the tenuous peace that was celebrated by the armistice. This conflict, as we all know, later mobilized 16.5 million Americans and cost the lives of 400,000. I like to say those numbers because it's so huge. I think we often forget the sheer numbers of people who were involved. Then on November 11th, 1947, just a few years after the end of World War II, a veteran named Raymond Weeks organized a parade in Birmingham, Alabama that honored all veterans. And as you know, Memorial Day, which is often confused with Veterans Day, only commemorates those who died in the armed services. But that occasion in Birmingham commemorates those, is credited as the first celebration using the term Veterans Day. And then a few years later, a congressman from Kansas proposed changing the official name of the November 11th holiday from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. And Congress renamed the holiday in 1954 after we engaged in 2 more wars, World War II and the Korean War, to include military personnel who served in those battles. Then there was one more makeover, maybe some of you remember it, and I remember it with disdain, when under pressure from the tourism industry, they changed the November 11th holiday to just be the Monday closest to November 11th. So we'd have a 3-day weekend, and we could sell more products, and people could go on more vacations. Well, lots of people protested and said we should stay with the day because it was November on the 11th month, the 11th day, and the 11th hour when the armistice ended. And that's when the President of the United States always speaks at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and commemorates, again, those who died. But regardless of the changes of name and days over many years, the purpose of this solemn remembrance is of bravery, loyalty, and the patriotism of millions of men and women. More women, we often forget the women who've served and are serving now, who have served in the past. And I think veterans, I like to think of those who are currently serving, even though they're not veterans yet, that they're helping keep us safe and free. How do we honor our veterans? I'd just like to go through this little bit to give you a sense. World War I, there's no memorial in Washington, D.C., and all those veterans have died from World War I. I've forgotten the last one died a few years ago, over 100 years old. There are people who are trying to get raise money for a World War I memorial, but as you probably know, we weren't in that war very long, and it wasn't one where the country really came together. World War II memorial, the greatest generation. We have some of you here today. I'm so proud that you're here. I think at least 3 of you. More than that for World War II. How many World War II? Yes, here, 2. Okay, that's wonderful. That memorial was dedicated in 2004, and I'm very happy to note, as you probably know, that the honor flights that are going on every year now, trying to get all those veterans who have not seen that memorial, get them back to Washington. And I'm proud to say this year the House of Representatives raised enough money to send 7 veterans, World War II veterans, to Washington, D.C. We have a Korean War memorial, and that was dedicated in July 7, 1995. That's called the Forgotten War, the one my husband was in. He served in the Marines. And by the way, yesterday was the Marine Corps' 200th birthday. 240, Semper Fi, to all those Marines. And then the Vietnam War Memorial was dedicated in 1982. And I read that they're also trying to provide honor flights for Korean War veterans and Vietnam veterans that haven't seen the memorial. Now, Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield, as it's called, is the largest American war of the 20th century without a memorial. And almost 400 soldiers died in that war. But Desert Storm was kind of a turning point for American society and how they treated veterans. And Vietnam was as well. Those returning from Vietnam were not given a hero's welcome. But those returning from the Middle East have been, thankfully. And we see many of these wonderful reunions at the airport. We've seen amazing things. I don't know what organization sponsors this, but fathers and mothers who've come back and gone to their children's school assemblies and surprised their parents are the most heartwarming events you could ever see. And veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan want their own memorial, but they say it's too soon for a memorial. Did you know that there is an act of Congress that said that it has to be 10 years after the end of a war before you can have a memorial? And now the memorials are mostly paid for with private money, and that's a lot of millions of dollars. How many of you have seen the World War II memorial? That's wonderful. It's very, very impressive, and I hope my husband gets to see it. I was in Washington last year and saw it, but I'm hoping that we can make that trip. But at this point, we have 6,840 service members who died in post 9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But one of the even sadder statistics is that on this Veterans Day, suicide has caused more American casualties than both of these wars. Every day, 22 military veterans die by suicide, more than double the civilian rate. Since June 2012, some 27,000 men and women of those we honor for their service on this Veterans Day have died by their own hand. And that's a tragic statistic. We know that post 9/11 veterans have suffered grievous injuries, missing limbs, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD. Many of the suicides involve vets that aren't enrolled in the VA's healthcare system. We need more research and far greater funding to get a handle on this problem. And also, today, over half of all the Iraq, Afghanistan veterans know personally someone who was killed in battle. So how can we honor the 19.6 million veterans beyond a day like today that's designated as a national holiday? Now, in California, and my grandkids, we just came from there a day ago, my grandchildren in middle school and high school are out of school. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because I don't know how many of them will attend any kind of ceremony or do anything to commemorate it, or is it just a day to sleep in? Or is it a day for families to go take part in the sales that are on Veterans Day? But here in Utah, I think most of the kids are in school, and I hope that their history teachers and their English teachers, and every teacher for that matter, spend some time today talking about those sacrifices that were made for us to have the country we have to live in, the great country, the greatest country on earth. In fact, last night when I was putting together my remarks, I texted my 3 daughters, one's in California, 2 are here, and said, just a thought, I hope you will tell your children about their family members who are veterans. And then I listed, as if they didn't know, on their dad's side, my side, and I said, I don't know about your husband's side, but please be sure and tell them about those who served. And they all texted back and said, one of them said, I tell my son every year the stories and he remembers them. And they all said, well, we will, and thank you for reminding us. That's something we can all do, and I think many of us have, is tell our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren about those in our family or others you know, but particularly your own family, so they're aware of that. Because young people today, I've found, think that veterans are all old men. You know, they really do. They're white-haired men. And a lot of them are. But you know what? They're our neighbors. They're men and women who serve in the National Guard. And that's the big change